Good evening.
Hi, George. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah.
Brilliant.
Okay.
I'm just messaging a few people. If you want to kick off, big apologies tonight. Ben's Zoom is broken, unfortunately, so I've tested my IT skills, setting up another one quickly and excelled myself. Over to you, George. Sorry we're late, everybody. We're limited to a 40-minute session tonight, so hopefully you can keep it buzzy up to that, George.
Yeah. Okay, good evening, everyone. My name's George Cousins. For those of you who don't know me, I'm one of the Aero squad coaches. I'm a freelance race coach and I'm a sailmaker. So tonight, the topic is starting. We're going to look at, one second, we're going to be looking at what we do pre-start, bit of pre-start routine when we get out to the race course, then how we assess line bias, how we might assess which end to start at, then what we can do in sequence in those last sort of 4, 3, 2, and 1 minute before the gun, and a little bit of specific boat handling for starting. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 or so little videos. It's harder compared to the boat speed stuff to actually get nice little capsules of videos that can sort of encapsulate what we do. So, but I do have some. And again, what I'm going to be doing, like we always do, is screen share so that you'll be able to see my own desktop and you can see the videos along with me, and I can annotate them and we can have a chat. Just like I always say, if all of you want to mute yourselves so that there's less interference between us, that's great. Okay, so I will begin by, hopefully I can do this. So Peter, could you, as the host, could you enable screen share, please? Brilliant. Okay, so you should all now be able to see my desktop. So I can then bring up, could a few of you, I know you're on mute, but could a few of you just have a little nod just to let me know? Brilliant, thank you. And away we go. So I've got some little notes and stuff about what we can do, and I'll upload these to the Aero Facebook site so you can read them all in your own time. But I'll just go through a few of the key points. Well, that wasn't the slide, is it this one? Nope. One more. Where are we here? Here it is. Yeah, so this is really I know there's a lot of text and it looks a bit boring, but this is really sort of a pre-start routine. And I think it's whatever level we are, it's always good to have a bit of a pre-start routine, and it actually helps relax you when you're at a big event and there's 100 arrows darting around. It's all really basic stuff, but it's stuff that we can often overlook. So stuff like, as you sail out to the course area, if it's a long way away, and especially if you're going downwind to the course area, you can actually stop at the top of the course, get a wind bearing, or stop and get a feel for which way the wind's coming from, and then you can make your way out to the course area and then get another wind reading, and then see if there's actually any noticeable difference. And there's lots of other stuff we could talk about here. Then once you get down to the actual course area, if you've got a friend, ideally someone that you're of a similar pace to, you can then do a split tack. So you both agree, right, we've got 15 minutes before the start. Let's both sail on one tack. I'll go on starboard, you go on port for 5 minutes, and then we tack. So you've got to synchronize your watches before that. 5 minutes and then tack, and then come together. And then one of you would hope would have a bit of a lead, and that should suggest which is the favoured side. or suggest if the wind is shifting.
But the operation then, I presume, would be something a bit more serious.
It's important once you've established, okay, that I went right and I came out ahead. It's important to sort of have a think about why that is. Is it driven by tide, current, a wind bend, or shift? Because if it's because the wind has just shifted right, then the boat on the right will come out ahead. And then if the wind is due to shift back to the left, that doesn't mean that the right will always pay in the race, which might be about to start in 20 minutes. So it's important to differentiate between if the wind is oscillating, or if it's a progressive shift in one direction, or if that gain feature is driven by tide. And then if there is tide, and in the UK quite often there is on sea venues, you then think, okay, is the tide pushing me over the line? Or is it taking me back? And that will affect how the fleet behaves on the line, and then that will affect your start. Similarly, if the tide is going down the line, or if it's going up the line. If it's going down the line from, say, the committee boat to the pin end, then that will make it harder to lay the pin. And then that means you'll need to set up further up, because the lay lines effectively become heightened. If the tide is flowing the other way from the pin end to the committee boat end, it effectively means that your drift rate is reduced, so you can hold on the line for longer, so boats are more likely to be OCS and push the line more. Point number 6 would be to get a transit, which sounds so obvious, but in big lines it's absolutely key. And you can even get one transit sighting down to the pin and another sighting back to the starboard end, called a back transit. And even you can then set yourself up a bit behind the line and get what's called a safe transit. And by then looking at those 2 or 3 transit, it gives you a really good awareness of where you are on the line. Finally, once you've done your split tack, you've looked at the forecast, and you've thought about tide, you can think, okay, it's a sea breeze day, it's 2 in the afternoon, the wind is probably going to go to the right, so I want to protect the right, and my split tack showed that the boat on the right came out ever so slightly favoured, so I think I want to go right, so I should probably have a cleaner start on the starboard end. And unless the pin end is very heavily favoured and it's a very long line, you're then probably going to want to start on that starboard end, so you're not boxed in, and then you've got the option to tack. So that's just a bit of background, but as I said, I'll upload all of that wall of text to the Facebook site. Right, in a second, if I can just go back. Why is that not working? Okay. Why is that not working? Right, so I get a video up now, and then we can go from there. Okay, so we'll crack right into the first video I've got for everyone. This is a really windy day with some Aero 5s. I'll play it through once, and then we can have a talk about it. Okay, so I think that the the main coaching point here, oh, and just for everyone who doesn't know, this yellow buoy here represents the pin end, is the pin end, and you can just see the other yellow buoy here with the rib tied to it is the committee boat end. So I think the main coaching point from here is, okay, there weren't that many boats on the line, but it is very, very windy. And that means the drift rate is quite high, especially once we start pulling on those sail controls. So we actually need to set up relatively close to the line, especially if we're near the pin end, so that we can lay the mark. And the second coaching point is that in strong wind, it does take a couple boat lengths to actually accelerate the boat, because your boat is being pushed back by the force of the wind. Whereas on flat water, in light winds, you can just do a nice fluid heel and a pump and a trigger pull, and the boat is up to speed almost instantly. And I've got a video to show you that in a bit. In stronger winds, it takes a couple boat lengths to get the boat up to speed. So consequently, it's important to set back a little bit. Another good little illustration in this video, this was a training exercise that we did at one of the squad weekends. It's a heavily pin bias line. It's not the best camera angle to sort of show that, but it was. So you can see the pin end boats were struggling to lay the pin. And I instructed a couple of the other guys to actually start on port. And you can see here that they're actually crossing the line so much quicker, almost at a right angle, compared to the boats which are on starboard tack, as most of us are, that they are crossing the line at quite an acute angle. So that means it's harder to judge, and it means if we're not making, if we're drifting, or if we don't have a lot of leeway relative to the pin, it's harder to lay. So that's another reason why if starting on port can work. And it doesn't mean you have to do a port end flyer. If you're near the starboard end and you want to go right, by starting on port, you can see that you can really squirt away and get away from the fleet quite cleanly and manage your time and distance. So it's just a little illustration of that, as well as talking about drift rate. Good. Where are we? So this next video is a slightly lighter wind day, slightly flatter water, and more boats, a much busier line. So the coaching point that I've got for here is about space to leeward and again laying the pin. We don't want to be that boat that sets up 2 or 3 boat lengths up from the pin in a minute, and by the time that last minute has gone, we've drifted down. Okay. In fact, what I perhaps should have done in my little intro, I know we're a bit tight for time this evening, so I was rushing a little bit. It's just set out a few sort of tips and basic ingredients for a good start. So one would be having a gap, obviously, having space to accelerate into. The second one, and that then tees into the second point, which is having a lane, so that you've basically got clean air and you're not in a pinching situation straight away, or where someone's footing over the top of you. So you've got a gap, which then leads to a lane. And you achieve both of that by having space to leeward, to accelerate into, and not being in a lee bow. And you achieve that space to leeward with some boat handling and reducing your drift rate, maybe some double tacking, a bit of legal sculling to keep the boat into the wind. So it's really those 4 things, and I can upload some of the actual text on the site. But it's a gap. You want a gap, and which then leads to you probably having a lane off the start line. And you achieve that by having space to leeward, ideally, so that you're not straight into a lee bow. And you achieve that, you maintain and achieve that gap, or achieve and maintain that gap by reducing your drift rate, by not letting the boat sag. And I've got some videos to come on to that a little bit later. And then it's a trigger pull, which is basically a rapid acceleration where you go from the boat being virtually stationary or just edging forward just enough to main grip on the fours to then shooting on. And I've got another video for that in a minute. But if I just play this through a little bit, you can unpause again. So here we are, sighting down the line. This is a training weekend again. So because there's no actual penalties and it's a training weekend, everyone tends to set up quite close to the line, which isn't always a good thing. But I think it highlights the importance of a good trigger pull. And you can see the boats here in this start line that did well and accelerated had that gap. This boat here just about had, so she maintained a boat length gap to leeward, and the boat above her and 2875 also maintained that gap. Another important point is that yes, we want to be near the favoured end, but in short lines, and this line is I would say qualifies as a short line, it's probably only 50 metres or so. The gain end to end isn't very much. So even if it's heavily port end biased or heavily starboard biased, being at an end which is properly congested, the risk from being embroiled in other boats and not having a lane and not having gap to leeward, then the result of you going slow, if that makes sense, that's worse than being not at the favoured end. Perhaps I could have worded that better. But what I'm saying is, in this start, it's marginally pin end bias, and there's a bit of a bunch here, but you can see actually Aero 2875 isn't at the favoured end, and they've got a bit more space, and they've got a gap to leeward, and they will definitely have a clean lane, which then means they'll probably have a good first beat. So, as with all things in sailing, it's never quite straightforward. So sometimes you don't want to be near the favoured end if you think it's too congested. So I'm going to play it through a couple more times, and I just want you to have a look at the difference in boats and look at how a gap to leeward translates into a good start. And the third little bit of little learning outcome from this video is the boats here, they have just set up far too near the pin end and they've drifted onto it, which means they'll either be over because they've got to accelerate too early, or they're just drifted into the mark and they're not moving fast at the gun. Okay. So this next video is of a slightly lighter wind day again and super flat water on Datchet. And this is basically the last, I think the video starts about 1:05 before the gun. So about 2 or 3 seconds in, you'll just hear the hoot, which is a 1 minute gun. So we can see that critical last minute. I'll play it through again. I'll play it through in its entirety, and then we can have a look at the coaching points that brings up. Okay, so that's a nice little video, and there's quite a lot we can unpack there. The first thing you'll hear is me shouting at some of the sailors to sort of be proactive and find a gap. And you see this quite often in the last minute, 40 seconds, where you get sailors here and they're sort of frozen by indecision. They sort of know that they're not going to make the line, and they know that they're going to be left out, and they just sort of wait with their fingers crossed and then inevitably have a bad start. So it's really important when you're in this position to be proactive. In this instance, I think the wind had actually shifted right quite a bit, which meant that these guys here, who would have effectively drifted down further, were then on more of a reaching angle, and consequently the boats near the starboard end were pushed out. So what this boat 1231 should really have done is double tacked or tacked and then jibed round and then got in the mix down here rather than just hovering. Okay, and the second little coaching point is there's a little bit of sculling and a bit of boat handling going on here, which is good. Ned in 2325 does quite well to maintain and reduce his drift rate. I'll play that through again. So you can see that he's using the rudder to push himself a little bit up into the wind. He's not got max kicker on because that's going to fill the sail and push his boat sideways. So the boat's going to drift more, which obviously you don't want. So he's then opened up a little bit of a gap to windward of these two guys who are below him. Now, we can ignore the boat that's right at the pin, who's a long way over. But in this start line, Liam, who is stood up, he's representing the flagpole of what would have been the committee vote. So the line is between him and the pin, which is about here. So you can see that there is, in the middle of the line, there is the phenomenon of line sag, which you get at big regatta lines where there's a super long start line. And that's caused by, when you're in the middle of the line, it's harder to know where the line is. When you're at either end of the line, it's easier to actually guess where the line is because you're near one of the buoys or the committee boat. So this sag here and the fact that these boats are in the middle, sorry, that these boats are about 2 to 3 boat lengths back from the line, illustrates the importance of transits. If these guys had a good transit, and especially if they had a back transit, which they could have got, because they could have sighted from the other end across this rib to the edge of the lake, and there would have been stuff on the edge. So there's really no excuse for these guys not to know, oh, actually, I'm 3 boat lengths back from the line. I'm not going to tell my other competitors that, but at 12 seconds to go, I'm going to just shoot on and go and win the start. So I think it's just a good illustration of line sag in the middle of the line. So I will play it through again and you can have a look. Okay. The final little nugget from this video, I think, is the importance of tacking out quickly. As soon as if we get a bad start, or if we don't win the start, and obviously law of averages dictates that, you know, not everyone can get a good start all of the time. So for a lot of us mere mortals, we're not going to win the start. But what we can do is we can be really proactive. So as soon as the gun goes and you think, okay, I'm okay, I've not got the best start, I've got a lane, but I'll probably lose it. You've got to be like, right, look at, actually head out the boat, look to windward, look behind. Have I got a lane? Can I tack out and get out? And Ned here, who did a bit of a slow acceleration, so this is 2325, and gets rolled by GBR 1323, who managed his time and distance quite well and just came in really fast. If I rewind that again. So you can see 2325 was in a good position, but was just too late on his acceleration and has got rolled by the boat above. Which is bad, but what he does well very quickly is he realizes this and he sees that there's an exit. And he puts a quick tack in and he's found a way out. And then he can find a way out to proper clean wind.
So immediately he's in control of his own destiny there, isn't he? By splitting.
Sorry, Peter?
Immediately he's in control of his own destiny there, isn't he? By splitting. He can pick his shifts and he's got clear air.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. So, right, next video. But yeah, so I know that's a slightly longer video, but there's quite a lot to unpack there, which would be being proactive, fighting for your position, managing drift rate and reducing how much the boat drifts down by just maintaining grip on the falls, by nudging the boat, a little bit of rudder to keep the boat into the wind, and not all your kicker and Cunningham on, because that's going to make the top of the sail wobble around and oscillate, which is just going to create more friction and drag. So that's some of the ways we can reduce our drift rate. And then being proactive with our escape, for want of a better word. Good. So rattling through these. So we've got the next little video is 28 seconds. Acceleration.
So while George is doing that, what are the really good moments for getting a transit on the start line? When's it really important to get a transit or really easy? I'll run through a couple. I think it's really important to get a transit more so than ever after a black flag start, because a lot of people are really cautious and stay back a long way. And if you've got a good transit, you can be a little bit bold even when the race officer's put his black flag or his U flag up. I think it's really important on the first race of an event, because a lot of people are really chilled and haven't really gotten a way of racing on the first race of an event. And a lot of people are further back during the first race, and you can accelerate forwards when they're all sacking behind. And it's really important when it's really easy to get one. When you've got high land, which is really clear on both sides of the start line, and somewhere I can really think of is Garda, where you've got really high land that sticks up above the committee boat. It's really easy to get a transit both ways. Somewhere like Lymington, it's surrounded by land, so you can get a transit both ways. Somewhere like Eastbourne, where we went last year, often you can't get a transit in one direction. You might only get one backwards. So it's really important when it's really easy. The other time, when there's a lot of tide, it's really important because it's very hard to judge exactly where you are on the line when you go very slow speeds, whether you're drifting over or backwards. So that transit will keep you aware of exactly where you are when there's a tidal flow. Back to you, George.
Thank you. Good. Okay, so the next little video I've got is of some I'll tell you what, actually, I'll skip ahead to this one. We'll come back to Gordon. So this is, we're talking about a bit of boat handling now. So what we can do on the start line to reduce our drift rate and stop the boat moving forward. We know when we set up on the line, sometimes the boat continues forward and we can just feel ourselves being taken over the line. So there's a little video here of a sailor just doing some slow speed boat handling, replicating what you would do on a start line.
So it happened this morning. Have you had internet drop out?
Had it drop out?
Yeah.
No, not here.
No.
Did it happen a couple of times?
Okay, so there's a little bit of gentle sculling there and some boat handling techniques to reduce our drift rate. At one point she pushed the boom out to sort of reverse the boat back a little bit. But you can see also that as soon as the boat stops, it just starts to slip sideways. So that's the reason why we should set up a few boat lengths back from the line, so that we can just very gently keep the boat going forward, a boat length every 30 seconds or so, just to maintain a little bit of grip on the foils. As soon as we stop, we just sag sideways, and then we hit the boat to leeward, and we're gunnel to gunnel, and we're the giveaway boat, and we can't do anything. So that's not a position we want to be in. She manages just about to get the boat round in the tack by sort of using her body to scoot the boat round, because there's very little actual boat speed, so the rudder isn't doing very much. So that she doesn't get into irons, she uses her body, and as the boat gets into the wind, she gives a little sheet on to kick the boat through the wind. If she was here and the boat had stopped and was in irons, then what she should do, well, she didn't need to do it, but you do see this quite a lot in racing, you then use your front hand to push the boom into the wind, and that's going to push the bow around. So that's what you call a sort of a light wind tack. And then she makes her way upwind a little bit just to find a gap and can then tack in. Okay. The next little boat handling piece I've got is of acceleration on the gun. So this is a start line. I was actually the pin end boat anchored in my rib here, so I'm sighting down the line. There's a lot of boats over, so the committee boat end of the line is which is Ross in his rib, is just about visible through the sail window here. But I don't want everyone to worry too much about the other boats. What we want to focus on is GBR 2325, who does a really good trigger pull, a really good light wind acceleration. I'll play it through once and then we can talk about it. Good. So you can see here that Ned is basically right on the line. He's got the luxury of a big gap to leeward, so he can actually reach down the line a bit. He then does a really good light wind trigger pull with a massive pump, similar to what you get out of a roll tack. he does that by instigating leeward heel, and it's very, very deliberate and physical. He actually gets his leg, one frame at a time, you can see his back leg, his left leg, is pressing down on the leeward side. And that is what instigates that leeward heel. That does two things. That makes the boat come up into the wind, because that's what leeward heel does. And then it gives him that ability to then pump the boat flat. He also has a little bit of main sheet out, the rudder's pushed away. Instantly up to speed in a single boat length, which we can do when it's light wind and it's perfectly flat water. So I'll play that through one more time. Okay. Right. The next little video I've got, where are we here? Doing for time, okay.
So
Is of another, sorry,
George,
Peter, go on.
Zoom have gifted us an extension, so we're not limited to 40 minutes. Great news. So we can continue as normal.
Brilliant.
Just going back to that last one of Ned's,
Yeah.
what kept him legal there is he can heel his boat over and pull it flat as long as it's associated with a turn, and it was, and as long as it's not repeated. So it was a great maneuver. It was legal because the turn was associated, the heel was associated with a turn, and he didn't repeat it. If he'd have done another cheeky one after he'd left the start line in the same piece of water, then it would have been repeated and illegal.
Yes. So we also, I think, yeah, that's really well put, isn't it? And we all sort of know that intuitively, that if Ned did that exact same pump when he was going down the reaching leg and the boat didn't change course, we'd sort of know instinctively that that's cheating, and of course the jury would pull him up. But as Peter said, because that's done, that the heel and change of heel angle is done to instigate a change in direction, that's okay. Good. So the next video is also of a trigger pull, but it's of a stronger wind day in Paynton. So I will play it through once and then we can have a talk about it. Okay, so the boat we're focusing on is this one here without sail numbers. So this is about, the video begins about 10 seconds before the start. So you can see, and you can't see it in this video, but they're very, very close to the start line. So the start line is only about a boat length ahead of them. Consequently, they can't sheet on very early, so they have to leave their trigger pull quite late. You can see that Noah has Cunningham on and Kicker on, but it isn't until almost the last minute he pulls on more Kicker. He then sculls the boat down to a below close hauled angle, gathers the main sheet in and gives the boat a pump flat. He's probably a little bit too physical on that second or third pump. And if there was a jury boat, or if I was a jury boat here in my orange rib, he probably would have got flagged. But ignoring though this repetitive pump flat, it's a very, very good trigger pull. I think while we're here, as a bit of a bonus, I can just pan across to Greg. One of the really important things directly after the start is that high mode, is being able to sail the boat high and give a bit of grief to those boats above you. So Greg here does quite a good job of doing that. So one of the ways we can get the boat to go high is to sail it flat. When it's flat, the rig and the sails are most efficient. And in strong winds for pointing, you almost paradoxically, you want to be sheeting the main in and out quite well. What Greg does really well here is you can see in a moment there's a gust coming and he's super quick to dump power. And that means that the boat doesn't heel at all and doesn't get knocked sideways, which obviously reduces your pointing and your upwind track. He's really quick to dump some power for the gust. And then also, as soon as it's passed, in again. So just as a bit of a bonus clip here, because I do think it relates to pointing off the line. We can have a look at that. So he's sailing really quite smoothly. He's not being overly physical. He's just working the boat quite nice. He's not steering too much, but he's shooting the main sheet in and out to keep the boat on its feet. Okay. I've got a couple more. I just need to find them. 1 second. Pin at 054. Okay, so this is of a sort of a medium wind day. I'm sat by the pin end, sighting down the line. So, and you can see the committee boat is here. I'm on the pin end, so you can see already this boat here, 2552, is over, and the majority of the fleet isn't. You can also see that these guys, these bottom two boats, have done quite a good job of reducing their drift rate and really squeezing the boats on top out. So I'll play it through once more, and I'll play it through again, and then we can have a talk about it. Okay, so I'm laughing because Frosty was very ambitious there and overconfident, so that's why I'm laughing. But if I play it through one more time and we can just see what went wrong for a lot of boats, because a lot of boats are over, a lot of boats didn't lay. So I know I'm singling out a lot of the young guys here, but I think it's a really good little video to sort of show what goes wrong in a lot of starts. Okay, so point number one. This is the pin end, that's a committee boat end. So here is the line. Frosty in the luminous life jacket and beanie saw that he was over and also saw that it was heavily pin end biased and tried to hotfoot his way over there. If it was a black flag or an I flag or I forget, there's one other that's a recent addition similar to I flag, which basically means you cannot be on the course side after after the P flag. So you cannot be between the committee boat, the pin, and the windward mark, that triangle. Then he would have been OCS. But because it was a training event and it wasn't any of those things, you only need to be on the course side, or not on the course side before the 1 minute. The second thing is that a lot of these guys have set up near the line, which is okay, but it just means that they're going to have to leave their trigger pull very, very late. So they're going to have to be pretty confident in their trigger pull, because they can't accelerate soon. It also means that if they're on the line, you can't move forward. If the boat can't move forward, the foils don't work, and the boat then begins to drift down, in this case towards the pin. We can't go forward because that we cross the line, so we stop because we haven't got any other option, and then the boat begins to drift down. In this race also, it was pretty heavily pin end bias, and then boat set up high and drifted down, and then couldn't lay the pin. It's always good to visualize that just like a windward mark, this is a pin end here, if you can all see that, and then that's the committee boat end there. But just like a windward mark, the pin end has ley lines. It's a really important thing to get. So if this is my little start line there, I know it's not the best one, but the pin end has ley lines. And in fact, unlike the windward mark, the ley lines for a pin are quite high because we're not moving. If the boat's moving, we know that our boat can point at about 30 to 40 degrees to the wind. But when we're sat in that final minute, we know that we're drifting down. So if this was the windward mark, yes, the ley line might be down here, but because it's a pin end and we're not moving, it's actually quite high. So once you realize that, you can then visualize that actually that area on the start line that we want to be in the last 2 minutes or minute is actually quite narrow. And that becomes more and more of the case the more pin end bias a line is, or if we've got tide against us, or if we've got tide going from the committee boat to the pin, because all of those things make it harder to cross the line and increase our drift rate. So we can see here that almost everyone in this last third of the line have misjudged that. And probably the wind went left as well.
We've seen that happen in the America's Cup a few times.
You can, I know I'm talking a lot, but I'll play it through a few more times. You can see here that because everyone's bunched together and that they're close to the line and they're not moving, the boats are just going sideways. So they're never, ever going to lay the line.
So in knowing that ley line to the end of a line, that's another transit you can get, isn't it? You can get a transit for the ley line off a port end of a line, especially when it's a mark and not a committee boat. It's easier. And it's important when the tide's with you as well as when it's against you, because you can go super deep to try and win the end of a line. And a little bit safe in the bag is good as well, just in case that wind does go left.
Yeah. And obviously when you get 30 boats on the start line, the wind, there's more turbulence and the wind feels less, doesn't it? So we're not pointing as well. But if I think I've drawn this a little bit better, if you all guys can see. So that's sort of what Peter's saying, that then you can then set up below the start line, below the pin end, and then gauge what that ley line would be, and then sight something in the background, which is why I've drawn a little tree. And as we said, that gets harder when there's tide, especially if the tide's against you, because you'll set up in the middle of the line and think, oh, I'm fine, I've got 2 minutes to go. But then by the time the gun goes, you're barely laying the pin. Okay, I'll play this through one more time. Good. And you can see here, we've spoken about the boats near the pin, but because it's such a tight start line, it's very, very difficult to actually have a good start and maintain that gap. This boat here has done quite a good job in the blue. I've got a bit of a gap. Unfortunately, there's 2 boats to windward of them. Ironically, it's probably the boats on the starboard end that come out quite well and are then free to tack. These guys here are racked up, gunnel to gunnel, and went on to then just mess each other up and sail a bit slow. And from memory, it was actually this guy here who could tack and then tack back on top of the fleet, but a little bit behind initially, but was then in clean wind. So it's important not to get too embroiled here, especially if you're an intermediate or a novice and you're not confident in your boat handling. It's better to have some space, and you can then action your first beat plan and think, oh, actually, I want to go right, and I want to get out the tide, or I want to work the shift, and you're then free to do so and sail your own race. Good. So that's all the content I've got for this evening. Peter, is there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's great, George. Open it to the room.
Yeah, sorry, any questions at all?
It's a huge topic. It's first of all, we've got to work out the right game plan, and then you've got to execute the game plan, which comes down to a bit more boat handling. Often comes down to boat handling. And in getting the game plan in the first place, you might have conflicting objectives or conflicting information. It might be port biased, but you want to go right, for example. And you've got to quantify the importance of each of those, which to a large extent comes from experience, having done lots of racing. You get better at that. But, it's a little bit of a gamble, an educated gamble, trying to work out what the odds are of each parameter. And then to win an end, it's a lot of boat handling, isn't it? And trying to judge that tide as well, perhaps.
Yes, and to win an end, it's risky, isn't it? And you're very, very exposed visually to. I mean, at most regattas, you've got a boat stationed here, sighting down with a VHF, who are then radioing in OCS boats. So you're quite exposed, and that is a topic actually we haven't spoken on very much. Is that sometimes it can be safe to be actually wedged between 2 groups, and you might be just over, but the race committee can't see you. So that there's that as well. But like Peter says, it's just about weighing up one end or the other. Yeah. And a pretty typical scenario is race officers tend to set pin end bias lines for 2 main reasons. One is, as we said, it's harder to cross the line on starboard when it's pin end bias. So by making a line pin end, it's generally there's fewer OCSs, so they can get races away quicker, which makes the committee look good. And second of all, you don't get a bunch at the starboard end marking the polished paintwork of the race committee boat, which someone has usually lent to someone. So that's why you tend to get pin end bias lines. So quite a frequent sort of strategy is, oh, I want to go right, but the pin end is biased, and as Peter says, they are somewhat at odds. So but really in practice, what you do, you want to be towards the favoured end of the line, but not that pin end boat. You want to be a few up from that, have a good gap, accelerate really well. So then you're free to tack. So you're near the favoured end. So you've got that gain, but you've got a sufficiently good start where you're not embroiled in a group, and you're free to tack over onto port and chug away out to the right, and then work the right, which you deem to be favoured. So that's quite a good game plan that you see sailors, some of the good guys do, starting a bit up and they enjoy the benefit of being near the favoured end, but have the freedom of then being able to tack and sail their own race.
So, George, one thing that would be really interesting is we've got a national race officer on the call tonight, Robin Gray from Northern Ireland. So, Robin, can you just talk us through a race officer's perspective? You've put in the comments, you don't just teach them to set level lines, you teach it's only the lazy ones that do that. Tell us about the race officer's perspective, Robin.
Oh, now you put me on this. Now you put me on the spot. Yeah, no, we teach level lines for dinghies at all times. The only time you would actually deliberately set a pin end line is if the fleet think it's starboard end ballast, and then you would possibly pull the pin up. And I mean, seriously, I can set a line that is completely pin end ballast, and the whole fleet are up at the committee boat. So we alter the line to suit the sailors, because they don't always know. Particularly in junior classes, they're all sheep. They just follow one. But certainly, from the point of view of you saying, oh, well, they always set a pin end line, that is not what we teach. We teach them to set absolutely level lines as far as we can. Of course, you cannot take into account the vagaries of the wind. Where I sail normally, it's oscillating 10, 15 degrees either side of a mean between 6 and 12 minutes. So I may set the line, and 10 minutes later the start is ballast, but we normally try to pull it one way or the other if we can.
And from a race officer's perspective, Robin, trying to catch out people who are over the line on a big fleet when they're all trying to push it and maybe they're trying to hide between each other, what's the race officer's challenge and skills in trying to catch people getting the most out of their start lines?
Well, the tendency has been in the last few years is that if you have a fleet of more than 25 or 30 boats, and it's something like lasers or arrows or boats that you can pull a trigger on fairly quickly, then we don't actually start on Papa at all. We would tend to start on uniform because that's the only way we can actually keep the fleet back. If you start on Papa and you get a few over and you have a general recall, you can't then go to uniform because, well, in some classes, Papa is the practice start and uniform is the useless start, and the only thing they actually understand is the black flag. So, sorry, George, but that's the way it works. So for the bigger fleets, we use uniform to try and keep them back. But, I mean, that particular line you're looking at there looks very tight to me. We normally recommend 150% lines, i.e. 50% more than the total length of the boats. And I would be talking to the race officer after that one to say, I think your line's a bit short, boy, because that will promote general recalls. Yeah. That will promote them every single time.
Yeah.
Okay. We've experienced that as competitors, haven't we? When a line's short, it's not a pleasant experience when it's too short for a big fleet of boats.
Yeah, it gets more difficult when you have big fleets. I mean, when you've got 80 or 90 boats. I mean, we can deal with about 80 boats on a line. You need really good observers both ends, but you're never going to get away with Papa in that case.
Yeah. And what's the leeway of a race officer if a wind shifts and people go over a black flag start, perhaps because it went face starboard bias, it's very easy to go over the line. What's your policy on that?
Well, my policy is very straightforward. If it's my fault, it won't be a start. If it's their fault, we'll let it go and take as many numbers as we can. If the wind has gone, for the sake of argument, right, so we've got a push up at the starboard end of the line, and it's fairly obvious that's happening, I won't actually make that start. I may do a very, very late AP, and I have AP'd it with literally 2 to 3 seconds to go. So that's not the fleet's fault. That's our fault because the line is not correct now for the fleet. So we will do an AP, bring them back. It's not fair to pull out 3 guys that you can see on a black flag, for instance, and let the rest go. It's not going to work. So our policy, definitely AP is your friend, And if you have a problem and it's gone left or right on that, if you can't solve it before the preparatory signal goes up, then we will AP it late. Or just
Okay.
AP it and reset the line.
Okay. And what sort of tools do you use to try and call boats over? If people are going over with 20 seconds to go and they might go back again, are you using a dictaphone or using a video or photographs? What's your process on that?
Everything you can possibly use. I mean, let's be straightforward about this. I haven't had any experience of aero lines yet because I've tried to be in the boat rather than watching the boat. But in that other class, which we won't mention, we're probably talking from maybe 2 minutes to go, and into a dictaphone. I will normally try to have video from my end of the line and also from the other end of the line if we can. And you said there, one of the comments George made earlier on is, oh, you're stuck in the middle of the line, the race officer won't see you. No, I've got your number about a minute ago. We can watch you doing these things, and it's remarkable standing on a committee about how you can see people coming through and literally doing the I'm going to hide behind Fred. See, we can do this all the time, even on a big line, even with about 80 boats. I mean, I did a European Championship last year in Greece. We had 389 boats in 6 fleets. And we would see the guys in the middle of the line thinking, all right, no problem. I can hide behind this guy, but we've got his number a minute ago. And all you're doing then is counting the last 3 or a couple of numbers, and we can identify them fairly quickly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But video is useful, but it's got to be done in the right way. And I would tend to have my video man forward in the boat and in the committee boat as far forward as we can.
To
and
give
his
them
job
that
is only to get the
perspective.
numbers.
Yeah.
Just to get the numbers.
I had a very interesting one at Burfield when it was a very crowded start line with a little bit of port bias in that the race officer, Ian Bullock, was videoing it.
Well, he's very happy with it. He loves his videos.
Yeah,
if he doesn't have at least 3 iPads looking at it, he's not a happy man.
So he attaches his iPad to his mast and he sets it rolling, so he knows he's already got it. And he saw me over with a second to go, and he called a single recall, but then he checked his video whilst we were racing, and I was hot a quarter of a boat width over, and I heeled it to leeward to accelerate as you pull the trigger, and pulled it upright, and it was the heeling to leeward made me clear the line when the gun went, and so he let me off before the finish time.
It happens.
Yeah.
We're not God.
Yeah, but that's certainly an advantage of having a video, isn't it?
It
can work for the competitors as well as against them.
Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you very much for your involvement, Robin, and thank you,
no
George.
problem.
Any more questions from anybody? Any more to add, George?
No, I don't think so. That is actually really interesting. What Robin said there about from the race officer's perspective.
So
I think
something
often we
get.
think, no, exactly, and I think often we think as competitors we're being smart and we're being clever, and there's lots of sort of myths around it. Like if you think you're over, reach down the start line with your main sheet pinned in so that the sail is in line with the race officer, then he can't actually read your sail number, and all of these things that we maybe think work or don't work. But yeah, no, it is interesting.
Great. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Sorry about the technical difficulties tonight. Ben's having a problem with his Zoom account, and good job we set another one up and just in time. So thank you for your patience, and hopefully we'll be able to post a recording tomorrow.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Thank you.